Brooks Running reminds us that we're all powered by something. Whether it's the me-time energy of a run after a day at the office, the electrifying energy of your first marathon, or the infectious energy of a group run with your friends. No matter what energy powers you, Brooks has gear specifically designed to unleash it. So lace up and let it out. Let's run there. Visit brooksrunning.com today to learn more.
The podcast you're about to hear is true. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent, the guilty, or anyone else. If you're interested in the same type of discussion related to organized crime that you hear in the traditional media, stop listening now. If you're interested in thinking differently or learning something, turn up the volume on your computer, smartphone, or mobile device. This is the Racket Report. Here's Frank Morano.
This is the Racket Report. I'm Frank Morano. Welcome to the podcast that is dedicated to exploring the world of organized crime and all of the ripples that have emerged in American society as a result of organized crime. Not just La Cosa Nostra, but every type of organized crime there is. And when you're talking about the effect that organized crime has had on anything, pretty soon you have to have a conversation about Las Vegas. I am thrilled to have a man that is not only an expert in all things Vegas, but especially an expert on classic Las Vegas. He also happens to be an expert on the business side of magic and an author whose works include The Dunes Hotel and Casino, The Mob, The Connections, The Stories. And he is somebody that has been a professor. He's been a writer. He's worked in the casino business. He has done all things related to Las Vegas for over a half a century. Very pleased to welcome to the Racket Report, Geno Munari. Geno, it's great to talk to you.
Frank, thanks for asking me to come on.
Geno, give folks a little bit of an idea of your background. I know you moved to Las Vegas back in 1964. Where'd you move there from?
Burbank, California. And my family, basically, my grandmother and all my uncles were immigrants from Italy, and they moved to Montana, and Butte and Roundup and Billings, Montana. And my cousin, Frank Schivo, was a protege of Milton Prell, who had a gambling operation in Montana. And they came to Las Vegas in the late 49, 50, and they built Club Bingo, and then they built the Sahara Hotel. And I came to Las Vegas in 64 to go to work at the Sahara Hotel as a busboy. He made me start at the bottom.
Well, so you didn't get to benefit from any nepotism, I guess.
No, not in my family, no.
Well, that bodes well. I imagine the Las Vegas you moved to in 1964 is very different from the Las Vegas of 2023, right?
Oh, what a difference. By people, first of all. I think maybe there might have been a little over 100,000 when I moved here, maybe a little less. Now there's 3 million.
Wow.
That's a big change. And people were different. Everybody knew everybody. And in fact, if you got drunk and drove a car, which is not a good thing to do, but the cops would drive you home. They wouldn't arrest you even in those days. It was just a whole different way. Everybody knew everybody, and you always went to somebody for a referral if you needed something done, like, where can I get a good mechanic? And you'd go to a friend, and there was no such thing as the internet and so forth. So it was just a different town.
So it sounds like if you're answering the question of how Las Vegas has changed over the years, it went from being a small town where everyone knew each other and the population was actually pretty small to being more of a city, a typical city.
Yeah, and now having a couple of sports teams qualifies it for special investment groups who want to come to Vegas. So it's made the town a bigger thing. But when I was here, most of the places, I would say a good portion of them, not most of them, were operated by people who were in illegal gambling back east, Chicago, Buffalo, all over the country. And they came here because it was legal, and they had a place. They went to Reno as well, and so it was operated by guys who knew the business. They didn't learn it in school. They learned it by hard knocks and actually operating speakeasies and backroom casinos. and so forth.
I want to talk to you about your book in just a minute because I'm absolutely fascinated by it. But you've done a lot of things in the casino business, in writing, in a lot of different facets of Vegas life. What sparked your interest in writing about classic Las Vegas and kind of being a chronicler of Vegas history? Why? I mean, you've been a professor, you've been a writer, you've worked in casinos. Why did you say, all right, I've got to get this down on the printed page? What sparked your interest initially?
Well, for a lot of reasons. You know, the Gaming Control Board and the Gaming Commission, they have files on every person who works in gaming and all the licensees. You know, if you try to get something from them, there's state laws that prevent you from doing so. So if you wanted to ask them who worked at the Sahara Hotel in 1950, 52, 53, they wouldn't tell you. It's against the law. Or why did that person not get denied a business gaming license? So I was around all these owners at the Dunes Hotel as a young kid. I first met one of the owners of the Dunes Hotel when I was like 18 years old, and it was at the airport at McCarran Field. I wanted to learn to fly, and I took all my money that I had and I could get a flying lesson for $10 an hour in those days.
Wow.
And so at the airport, owners had airplanes. And they tell stories about various other guys, you know, about guys that worked in the casino business, Gus Greenbaum, and many, many other ones. And I was fascinated by the stories. I was fascinated by gambling. It just was unbelievable, you know, and I think that's what really, I wanted to preserve it. I wanted to, you know, because it's passed down to me, and I leave this world. Who's going to know about these stories at the Dunes? And that was one of the main reasons why I wrote it. I wanted the true story of the Dunes known.
Tell me, before we get into your book specifically, about, and I know this predates your time in Las Vegas a bit, but the amount of people that you've spoken with and your connections in the Las Vegas area, I know that you can answer this question with your eyes closed. What was the mob's role in the formation of Las Vegas, or if not its formation, at least bringing Las Vegas to the kind of gambling mecca that we know it to be today?
Well, there was various operations, various mob operations. You know, there's the mafia, there's the Chicago outfit, and there's the syndicate. You know, and so they all had different ways of operating gaming, and they did it in cities where they knew what the best way to treat a customer was. And so when they came out here, they knew that they needed rooms, they needed good food, they needed the belly touch. You know, where a boss would come up to somebody and shake hands with them, you know, and meet them and extend a courtesy to them. You know, they were just different. They weren't, I hate to use the same word, pencil pushers. They weren't. You know, they looked at things a different way. They knew if they gave away good food, and they had good food, good entertainment, you know, nice, clean place, friendly atmosphere, people would come back. And that was the driving force. Whether it be a local casino that just attracted locals, or a tourist resort on the Las Vegas Strip. You know, they just knew how to operate. You know, they didn't have computers in their hands. They didn't walk around with smartphones. These guys ran this thing with their wits. You know, they just knew how to operate. They knew what was good. And they didn't say, oh, we can't afford to do that. They did it. They had the finest food. They had the best chefs. I mean, you know, I had one boss one time. He told me, I want you to stick your finger right in that sauce and taste it every single day. If it doesn't taste good, throw it out. I mean, you know, so that was the secret. Secret was good food, good bargains, you know, and classy stuff. And, you know, and they gave people like an adult Disneyland in a way. That's really what they did. And people loved it and just kept coming back. The Rat Pack, all those guys, the people loved to be around it. They just wanted to be in the casino where those guys were hanging out. And good entertainment. The Sahara Hotel had some of the finest. You know, Marlena Dietrich, even Donald O'Connor. You know, Victor Borgia, and you know, and bigger stars. I just can't have them at the top of my head. But
no, I mean,
wonderful shows.
Those are big as names as you could imagine seeing in person. So what was the Dunes Hotel? Why focus on that? If people know Las Vegas from a visit that they've made in the 21st century, the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, they may not be up on the history of the Dunes. What was the Dunes?
Well, first of all, the Dunes now, where the location is the Bellagio. That's where the location was. Why I picked the Dunes? Because I worked there 2 times. That's why I picked the Dunes. And I was 22 years old when I went to work in the 21 pit. And I think it was 1968, I think it was, early 68. And it was just fascinating. I never saw anything like this in my life. I never saw so much money in my life, cash. And so when I'm working in the 21 pit at the Dunes, I hear stories, and all the bosses you work with, they tell you stories, and, you hear all this stuff. It's just fascinating. It's just like unbelievable stuff you want to know more about, and you want to be like them. You want to emulate them. All the dealers had pinky rings, like the bosses did, and, they bought fancy watches. They had custom shirts made, and, custom slacks. It was a classy operation. And you wanted to be like them, basically. And the Dunes, after about 6 months, I was practicing baccarat in my garage. We built a little homemade table, a piece of plywood, and we had a layout. And I practiced there with paper money, and some, we didn't use chips. Baccarat was dealt with real cash in those days. And so one day, I was watching the bosses in the pit before I was going to go on my table, and they were in a pretty good mood. And then when they were in a good mood, you could talk to them. If they were in a bad mood, you stayed away. And so I had the nerve to walk up to the guy that hired me, and I says, "Mr. Duckworth," and he was a fine guy. I says, "I'm learning baccarat in my garage, and I was just wondering if I could go over there in my own time. I don't want any money. I just want to maybe practice, maybe an hour or two." He turned to me and he said, "Get yourself 2 tuxedos. You start tomorrow night." And he walked away from me. I couldn't even tell him I don't even know the game. That's how I got. That's how I got in the baccarat pit. So when I went in the baccarat pit, I'm the youngest guy. All these guys, this was the choice place to work in the Dunes Hotel. In fact, in any hotel, all these guys are wondering how'd this kid get in here. I was kind of real, a little shy on this. And there was a certain boss there from New York. His name was Vince Tagliatella. And he worked in Harlem. He worked for games that Fat Tony Salerno operated. And he was a paper dealer, meaning cash dealer. And he even had a Ziganet game. That was an Italian game. Sure. Similar, what that is, similar to, that is. And he dealt paper and all that stuff. Well, one day, he kind of always stood up for the underdog. And so one day, those guys were always ribbing me and razzing me, and giving me a hard time, basically. And, I'm trying to learn everything I could. And as I'm coming off one day I was on the stick. That's where you call the game in baccarat. And I walk around the table right by the boss's high chair, and he said, "Come here a second. Can you make? I got a memo here. Can you make? I can't see that word. One word here." And I looked at the word, and it was pretty clear, And I realized maybe he doesn't have a good command of the English language. And I helped him. I very quietly helped him. And from that day, he took me under his wing, and taught me everything. And he was a bookmaker. He was a Shylock, and he was something. I used to go to his house for dinner with his wife. They'd cook dinner for Italian food, and people would drop money in envelopes through his mailbox while we were eating. And then he'd do his books, and he'd write down little things on little pieces of paper. He'd fold them up and put them up in his pocket, up in his upper top of his trouser pocket. And then he'd pull the pocket out, and you couldn't see the stuff. And he says, "You always do that in case you get arrested." The guy was a beauty, and he was a Shylock. He was 5% to small-time guys, bartenders and, dealers, and, 3% for bigger money. And so that's how I got to know him. It was just unbelievable. So
I'm going to ask you a question which you say on your website, which people should check out. It's genomunari.com, GenoMunari. You say on your website it's too difficult a question to answer with a yes or a no, so I'm going to invite you to give a more expansive answer to this question. Was the Dunes mob-controlled?
I would say the Dunes was mob-influenced, and they had partners. Yes, it was. Absolutely.
What happened to them?
They had various mobs in there. Okay, and there's an FBI memo where they have electronic surveillance on Giancana and a guy by the name of Pazzi talking about Sid Wyman, who was one of my bosses. And so I'm not spilling any beans here. He was great to me, and he was a big boss there. And he had the majority interest in the Dunes Hotel. Him, his partner Charlie Cupie Rich, and Charlie's stepson George Duckworth. They controlled the Dunes. And so Wyman's talking to Pazzi. The FBI's got this memo, and he's saying, Pazzi's saying to Wyman, "Is there any way we can make some money if I invest some money with you?" And he says, "I always hold back about $1,500 a shift for that sort of thing." So and these guys were Chicago, and then Pazzi's talking to Giancana. He says, "You think I should do that?" And I believe that there was several guys from Chicago involved in the Dunes, as well as a couple of other people from Detroit and around the country, New York as well.
I know you mentioned that the Bellagio is where the Dunes is now. When did the Dunes' tenure as a casino hotel end? When did it cease operations?
Oh, I can't give you the exact date. I should know that.
Ballpark.
But yeah, it was like 1993, I think it was. Yeah.
And what happened? Why did the Dunes empire come to an end?
Well, it went through all kinds of issues. First of all, you had the Dunes guys in the early 70s. The Dunes owners, several of them got indicted for skimming, and so they had to work on this trial. Now these were people who had gaming licenses, so they did some shuffling around and they sold some stock to Michelin Rickless, who owned the Riviera, but he never took it over the deal. But they had to do something because here you have one of the vice presidents and the main owner indicted, and they got a trial coming up. Well, they beat the trial. Harry Claiborne was their lawyer, the judge Harry Claiborne, who was impeached. He was a local defense attorney, the smartest guy in the world. And the co-attorney was Morris Schenker, who was from St. Louis, who was their attorney when they were in St. Louis for stuff. He was also an attorney for Jimmy Hoffa, which I used to see Hoffa come in the Dunes several times, by the way. I was working there. In any event, the Dunes, these guys, they beat the case, but Wyman was getting older. He got sick. And Schenker and another guy, they purchased the Dunes Hotel, the majority of it. And I believe, things didn't change much. It was still, he's basically a front for several outfits. And they just took all the money out of the Dunes as much as they could, and they never put anything back into it. But he wasn't a good operator. Schenker wasn't a guy that knew gamblers. He would go down into if the game, say a crap game was really running hot, he'd go on there and tell the shift manager, take those dice off the table. Players would get mad. He was a greedy guy. He had his son working there, his wife working there, and he was funneling as much money as he could out of there to put into a place in Murrieta Hot Springs. He built a resort down there that didn't make any money whatsoever, but he did wind up with a lot of property in San Diego, and it got tougher and tougher for him to pay the bills. And I'm sure that there was plenty of skimming going on, and by him, and that was that. And he sold it to a couple of other people. They eventually had the same troubles. There was too much debt on the property because the property was owned by one company and the hotel was owned by another company. And they just couldn't handle it anymore. And finally, it went to bankruptcy court, and Krikorian was going to buy it. Kurt Kerkorian, the financier that built the MGM Grand and TIA Airlines, and he owned Western Airlines at one time. Fabulous guy. And at the last minute, he pulled out, and Steve Wynn bought it.
And the rest is history, I guess.
The rest is history. But a funny story is that the guy by the name of Jerry Zarowitz, who was the big boss at Caesar's Palace when they opened, the boss, period. He told Jay Sarno and Jacobson what to do. He was the ultimate boss. He had 75,000 shares of Golden Nugget. And the Gaming Commission encouraged him to sell that stock to a certain individual so he could acquire the control of the Golden Nugget. So it was such an interesting combination of people. Pretty hard to unravel. But hope I didn't get off track here.
No, I'm fascinated by this. The fact that you got a ringside seat for all this is just incredible. So the book that we've been talking about, the Dunes Hotel and Casino, the mob, the connections, the stories. There are a number of incidents described in this book that you experienced firsthand, right? And you tell the stories in the first person.
Yes.
And now, how about the others? Who were the sources for the other stories that you didn't get to witness firsthand?
You know, I had, I think I have over 390 footnotes. I wouldn't write something unless I could put it down. There's a couple of people I have to keep anonymous for family reasons. They're family, but in some of the one or two of those, one guy is still alive, and when he told me something, I know for a fact it was a fact. Are you specifically referring to? Can you tell me a story? Which one you are interested in? No,
just in general. I mean, with 350 footnotes, I'm just curious about the kind of folks that were your sources for the book.
Yeah, I had guys. I had one guy that worked for Kerkorian, and he was Kerkorian's right-hand man. And a second guy that worked for Kerkorian, who was in charge of all the casino guys, and they worked with Mo Dalewitz in Kentucky. Which is an interesting story. I don't know if you knew, we didn't get on this much, but, Howard Hughes wanted to buy the Dunes, and he was buying properties, he sold the Frontier Hotel, or he bought the Frontier Hotel, and Mo Dalewitz also sold the Desert Inn, and Johnny Roselli, which was another book I published for a guy, the All-American Mafioso, he shook down Mo Dalewitz at the Brown Derby restaurant in Los Angeles, Hollywood. And he felt that because of the sale of the Desert Inn, he didn't get a big enough piece of what he should have got for basically a finder's fee. He really shook him down, and Dalewitz didn't like him. And so a lot of people think, that might have been the reason maybe he was offed, but there's a lot of other reasons for that. But all my sources were absolutely real sources. And this one source, who was one of the, I can't tell you his name, I wish I could. He was the greatest guy I've ever known in my life. I used to have dinner with him and the other fella at least once a week. And, I didn't want to get too nosy, but he knew I loved the stuff. And he gave me a picture. And I won't publish it because I don't want to incriminate my friend. But there's two other guys in there, and he says, this is the real godfather of Vegas. And that was Jimmy Blue Eyes. It's Blue Eyes Alo, A-L-O, who was Lansky's, one of his best friends. Wow. And a couple of other guys. And he says, he's the guy that really was the real godfather of Vegas. And so these stories were just precious to me. In these talks I had with people, I'd ask them every question I could possibly ask them. So I hope I'm not going off course here for you, but Roselli, was around the Dunes and he knew Wyman, but a lot of guys think that because of Roselli being hired by Bob Mayu, who came to the El Rancho, and the first person he meets is Johnny Roselli, and then up comes Belden Cattleman, who's introduced to Mayhew by Johnny Roselli. In the meantime, Mayhew's got a subpoena in his hand for Belden Cattleman. That's the reason he had to come, but he wouldn't serve it because out of courtesy to Johnny Roselli. He didn't want to embarrass anybody. But there may have been another motive for killing Johnny Roselli. A lot of people think it was because of the JFK thing.
I'm going to get to that. So,
okay.
Let's backtrack a little bit since you brought up Johnny Roselli. Give folks an understanding of who exactly Johnny Roselli was in underworld circles and in Las Vegas circles.
Yeah, in underworld circles, he was the Chicago guy. He was number one guy in Las Vegas for them, and he also was out in Hollywood with a couple of guys, putting the shakedown in the movie studios. His wife was an actress, June Lang, and locally he was the guy. He was the guy here that got things done. He had an interest in the Tropicana Hotel and some other little businesses with a few other people. But the Sheriff Ralph Lamb, he wised off the Sheriff Ralph Lamb, and Ralph Lamb knocked the hell out of him and took him down to a Metro jail and loused him with chemicals and threw him in jail and to teach him a lesson. And he was a guy that was, that Roselli hired Giancana to kill Castro. And locally, they say, well, that's why he was murdered. But Roselli was a bad guy. There was a guy by the name of Chinky Rothman from Philadelphia. He had a son by the name of Al Rothman. And a lot of people think this may have been the motive. Now, remember, this is a little gory. So if you have children, if you have children, just kind of guard them away from this. But when they found Roselli, they cut off a piece of his body and stuck it in his mouth.
Wow.
Okay. Now, you don't do that on a regular mob hit unless you're talking too much or you're really out of line with a woman. And so this Al Rothman had a wife who was a cocktail waitress at the Desert Inn. She ran away with Johnny Roselli, and a lot of people think that was the issue, and a lot of people don't. But it's something that has to be brought into the picture. But an FBI report back in '78 believes that the two guys that killed him were Chicago guys, Frankie Schweif and Vincent Joseph Insero. So, I kind of believe that story over the Rothman killing, but it's very, very possible that he could have killed him too.
So Johnny Roselli's name, as you alluded to, pops up a lot in discussion of various theories about the Kennedy assassination. To the best of your understanding, what did Johnny Roselli have to do with the Kennedy assassination?
Well, I don't believe Johnny Roselli had anything to do with it, in my opinion. That's just my theory. He was a friend of Judith Exner, who was one of the most beautiful brunettes you've ever seen in your life, that Kennedy really liked. And I just don't believe, she was like his messenger girl to the president. I just don't believe Roselli was involved in killing Kennedy. However, in the All-American Mafioso book, it was written by a guy by the name of Ed Becker, who was at one time an entertainment publicity guy at the Riviera Hotel when Wyman was working there and the mob was involved. And he always wanted to act like, and he was involved in the Grim Reaper book with Ed Reed, and he was also the architect of the Greenfeld Jungle. I knew Ed Becker. We used to hang out at this place called Cafe Michelle on Flamingo Road. Everybody after work would go there to eat lunch they'd have or dinner. Wonderful food they had. Greek owner. It was just wonderful. And Becker used to go there and hold court in the afternoon. And me and a couple of friends of mine would stop over there. And one afternoon I was sitting close to Becker, and the guy in between us was Tony Montana. Tony Montana's uncle was John Montana, who was the mob boss in Buffalo, who was at the Appalachian meeting. And but Tony was in Chicago. And, he was a friend of Ed's, and he did stuff for the outfit, and he operated a couple of bars and stuff, but he worked for a few of the outfit guys, including Spilatro. And Tony was really a decent, really nice guy. And I'm listening to these stories, and that's how I met Tony. And Ed Becker was a braggadocio guy and always want to pat himself on the back. And, when I worked at the Dunes, I sensed when you talk to somebody or listen to somebody for 10 minutes, you can tell how much is really real and how much isn't. So I kind of had a little, kind of like an offish feeling about him. He just didn't feel right. But Tony and I became great friends. And so Tony helped Ed Becker put together the All-American Mafioso book. Extremely well, he helped him. And after Ed Becker died, Tony brought this up to me. He said, why don't you republish this? So I did for him, and I republished it, and it's still being sold on Amazon. And there's also a Kindle version. And so I interviewed Tony Montana many, many times. This one afternoon, we're talking about where Ed Becker... Well, first of all, Tony arranged the interview with Carlos Marcello in New Orleans.
And I was also going to ask you about it. So explain to folks who Carlos Marcello is.
Carlos Marcello was a New Orleans mob boss, a Sicilian, real mafia guy. He controlled New Orleans completely. He had beautiful gambling joints and slot machines all over the city. They had a beautiful place that obviously had tables and entertainment. And then he also had a hidden interest in the Tropicana Hotel, and I believe a couple of other, but I don't know exactly which ones they were. So Ed Becker wants to go to see Marcello and interview him because he claimed in his book, by the way, that he was in Marcello's home on his farm in 1962, and he sat there and listened to Ed Becker. He sat there and listened to Marcello talk about how he's going to kill President Kennedy. In 1962, that's in the book. And then, so I'm interviewing Tony about this one afternoon, got all done with the interview, and then we turned it all off, turned the recorder off, and I said, hey, Tony, this is really interesting. I don't know. I never just thought of this. But you told me, well, in the book it says that Ed Becker was in Marcello's office in 1962, and he's sitting there with another guy, and he heard this story about biting the tail of the dog and all that, and he's going to kill the president. He said, yeah, that's right. I said, so how come then you had to bring him down there through Joe Pignatella? Call him Joe the Pig. It was a Chicago outfit guy who ran the Villa Diaz, Sinatra's favorite chef. And Joe the Pig knew Marcello's brother very well. And you asked him, as you told me, favor to introduce Ed Becker and interview Marcello. And you got that on. Is that correct? Yeah. He said, we flew down there. We stayed in one hotel, and we called the brother. And he says, a guy's going to pick you up tomorrow morning, and we're going to take you out to the plantation or the farm, and you're going to talk to Marcello. And I said to Tony, when you walked in there, how did Marcello greet you? Wouldn't he have recognized Ed Becker from 1962? He says, you're right. He didn't even know him. He said, what's this all about? He didn't say, hello, Ed, or I remember you. Or Ed said, you remember me? I was here in 62. That didn't happen. I mean, I interviewed Tony 4 times on this. I wanted to make sure that he was accurate. And so I says, well, that means that he wasn't there in 62. That might have just been hearsay that he heard about. He says, you're right. I sent that information to G. Robert Blakely, and he says, it's good to hear that. A little late, better late than never. Who was the assassinations attorney, the House Assassinations Committee attorney. And so I believe Ed Becker completely fabricated it. And he used it to his own reasons to sell books and make himself somewhat famous. So I believe that. That story I actually believe.
Your burger is served. And this is our finest Pepsi Zero Sugar. Its sweet profile perfectly balances the savory notes of your burger.
That is one perfect combination. Burgers deserve Pepsi.
I've spoken with Robert Kennedy Jr., who obviously has been very outspoken on not only his father's assassination, but his uncle's assassination. And one of the things that he points to was that there were a number of areas of collaboration between the mafia and various government agencies, either the CIA or the FBI, meant to carry on different things, be it the assassination of Castro or other high other things going on during World War II. And he points to that as an indication that he thinks there was likely some elements within the CIA that dealt with some elements of the mafia regarding the assassination. Do you believe that?
I do. I believe that Marcello could have had he was capable enough to do it. He had the means to do it, and a few other guys had the means to do it. There's no question in my mind today. I do believe it was a conspiracy. Look at this last guy, Landis, who was a Secret Service agent, just came out after all these 60 years.
Right.
That he even thinks it's a conspiracy. Yeah. And I think it was. And I think they used various people who were rogue members of the CIA. I do not believe the CIA killed Kennedy. I believe a rogue department of the CIA did. A group of people, almost like Executive Action with that was made, that movie. But I believe that. And there's so much evidence and incongruities that have shown up that prove this. I always thought before this Landis came out with the bullet thing, I thought that Jack Ruby dropped the bullet on the stretcher because he ran into a Texas newspaper reporter there at the hospital. And I'm thinking, what was he doing there? Why was Jack Ruby at the hospital?
Right.
That Landis came out and answered the story. But I do believe they were together. Look what's just happened. And I'm not knocking the FBI, the good, solid guys that are on the field that work hard. They have to do what they're told to do. And I believe that you're welcome. You know this from the recent hearings we've had with the chief of the FBI, Ray. Look at the problems. They don't reveal and tell you everything that happens. Look at the things with Martin Luther King, what happened. A lot of stuff is very strange. And I do believe that. And look at Lansky and Luciano. I mean, Lansky basically brokered the deal to get Lucky Luciano out of jail. So I do believe they've always used them, even since the OSS, because those, the mafia guys knew how to get things done. They're guerrilla. They could get things done and no one knew who they were. So, I kind of believe that. Now, even in the police station in Dallas, when they were questioning Oswald, a remark was made, and Jack Ruby corrected it. What is he jumping in there for? He corrected a mistake that somebody had made, in a question. So there's so many things that are incongruities. Rose Sharami, the somewhat prostitute that was thrown out on the road 3 days before the JFK assassination on the way back from Louisiana to Dallas. And she told the doctor that the president was going to get killed at 12:30 in Dallas. I mean, there's all these, and then there's these operators in Oxnard, California, who received a telephone call that Bobby Kennedy investigated this, by the way, that they said the president's going to die tomorrow afternoon at 12:30 or something like that. So it's just too much. And those guys had the means to do it. And what did Oswald do? A lot of people think he was an agent of the CIA that was working to catch these guys, and it all backfired on them. I don't know. It's a really complicated story, but I do believe a couple of rogue members of the CIA and a few mercenaries, Sturgis maybe, a few other guys, plotted to kill. And I think Roselli might have known about some of that, but I don't think Roselli had a hand in it. But I do believe the mafia was involved. Because in my book, I don't know if you read this portion of it, there's a guy that worked at the Desert Inn. And he was a dealer. First of all, he was a sniper in the Marines, and he got out of the Army in the late 50 or 49 or something like that. He was from Alabama, and he went to work as a dealer in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And in those days, when you wanted a dealer, they didn't have dealing schools in Las Vegas. You had to call somebody back east that had a gambling operation, and can you get me a 21 dealer? Can you get me a crap dealer or a wheel dealer? That's a roulette wheel. So this Mo Dalitz needed a good dealer on the wheel. So Mo Dalitz called a guy in Hot Springs that he knew, and he recommended this guy. The guy came out to Vegas, and he went to the cage, got an apron and a tie, and Mo Dalitz didn't meet him until he could find out if he could deal well enough. Otherwise, there's no reason to even talk to him. And after a couple of weeks, he realized the guy could deal. And so this guy went to work there, and he was a good dealer, and he was promoted along the way. And Mo Dalitz, jokingly said to him, "Hey, one day let's go out in the desert and see if you can shoot that rifle like you told me you could." And so going out to the desert in 1952 or 3 was just like stepping 1 block out the back door. It was all desert. And they would go shoot cans and quarters, and this guy was an expert shot. He says, "Oh, maybe I could use you sometime," kind of jokingly, right? He promoted this fellow into a special duty assistant to him, did all of his errands, protected his family, and anything that Mo Dalitz wanted, he did. Well, this one day in 1963, Mo Dalitz is having a meeting upstairs, and this gentleman, Mr. X, basically went on an errand for Mo Dalitz, and he went, got the information he needed, and he came back to the Desert Inn, and he was told that he was upstairs in the country club on the 2nd floor in a meeting. So he went there, and he said there was 2 guys sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and he didn't recognize them. And he said, "I'm here to see Mo." And they said, "Just a second." They went and got Dalitz. He came back, and he says, "Come on, let him up." And he went up to the country club, and Mo brought him in and into a room. And he said, before he went into the room, he said, "I want you to meet some guys." And sitting at this table when he opened the meeting, and this is what this gentleman said. And I interviewed this gentleman 4 times. One time in front of Mo Dalitz's daughter, and he never blinked and never changed a story. He said, at the table with Dalitz was Nick Savella from Kansas City, Sam Giancana, Lyndon Johnson.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe this. I couldn't believe the story. So I went out and did some research, and I found out through the Presidential Library of Lyndon Johnson, he was in Las Vegas at the Desert Inn Hotel and stayed, I think, in room 345. They went to the Tropicana show, which was owned by Marcello, and he went to the Stardust show, which was owned by Dalitz and the Cleveland outfit and a few other guys. And that was that. And later on, and I asked him, what year was this? And I believe it was early 63, in 63, according to the statement of the room. So anyway, Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson is quite an interesting background. He was very different, you might say, accused of having people killed before. But the point is, Dalitz then contacted my friend, and he said, hey, listen, how do you feel about doing some work? And he knew exactly what he meant. And he says, well, I don't kill women, and I don't shoot politicians. And laughed it off and left it as it be. Now, who knows what they were talking about? It could have been about killing Castro, or it could have been anything. Who knows what it was? And no one, by the way, Roselli was not at that meeting, by the way. So it's very, very interesting to me. And this is no evidence you can just throw under the rug and not bring up if it didn't happen to me. And how I found out about this, I happened to be at a little restaurant. I was writing my book in a notebook. I was writing a chapter, and he just happened to come out there, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing a book about the dunes, and I got a chapter on the Kennedy thing. And he said, the Kennedy thing? He says, we should talk together. And so we made a meeting, and we talked, and I recorded him, and I did it 2 times, and I believe this really happened. So that's my story about that.
Wow, my goodness.
So, I mean, this guy, I've known this guy for 40 years. He was an executive at the Desert Inn Hotel. I know his wife as well. And all credible people. They're the most stand-up people you ever want to meet in your life. In fact, I could even arrange an interview if you would allow it with you. I'd like you to talk.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
That could happen. So I'm going to look into that.
I would love to do that.
I didn't want to put his name in here.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I would love to do that. But we're almost out of time. But there are a couple of quick areas I have to ask you about before we wrap up here, Geno. One has to do with Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa has been, I don't even think you could say rumored. I think it's widely accepted that Jimmy Hoffa had extensive dealings with organized crime. What is your understanding of Jimmy Hoffa's relationship with the mafia, and what did you get to see firsthand regarding Jimmy Hoffa and the Dunes or Las Vegas in general?
Well, he was very close to a couple of guys at the Dunes, but there's no question Hoffa was represented by Morris Shanker for a short time, and he was a personal friend of Major Riddle at the Dunes, Sid Wyman at the Dunes, and Charlie Rich at the Dunes. And he visited the Dunes sometimes secretly, and at one time he wanted a couple of the Dunes guys to buy an insurance company so he could give them all the insurance business. But there's no question Hoffa approached a guy by the name of Ed Parton, who was the guy that put Hoffa in jail in Tennessee in that famous case. And Hoffa wanted to kill Robert Kennedy. And there's no question about that. Parton took a lie detector test, and all the details and all the necessary investigative questions were asked of him, and it's true. And I believe Hoffa, maybe supplied some money, maybe supplied some help, but he did proposition this guy to kill Robert Kennedy. Wow. Hoffa, there's no question. The reason he was killed, in my opinion, because he wanted to become president again, and he was going to
of the Teamsters.
Yeah, and he was going to rat on all the rest of them and all the other guys. He was going to rat on him, and that's why they killed him. They believe he was going to talk to keep himself out of jail and to win the election. And, he hated Fitzsimmons, who was his hand-picked guy to take over for him. And another reason why maybe Dorfman was killed, who was hand-picked by Hoffa. So, all that money, there was too much money to play with. That's what it was. One of
the things you delve into a bit in your book is a mysterious bomb assassination plot. Who was that an assassination plot towards?
Oh my God, that's a really a guy. The plot was done by was going to be performed on a guy by the name of Ash Resnick, who was one of the owners of Caesar's Palace, who was an associate of Fat Tony Salerno, and he couldn't keep his hands out of the till though. Okay. And he was a bookmaker, and he was an ex-pro basketball player. And he did something to somebody. I know it had something to do with the Tropicana Hotel. They were all vying for power out there when Savella was behind the wheel, secretly. The Tropicana was, up for grabs. A couple of the guys that I knew one guy, his name was Pacey, who was a bookmaker, and a friend of the guys at the Dunes, who actually deposited $100,000 into the cage for himself for safekeeping so they could have a bankroll to operate the casino. They were short of cash. And so there's no question either Ash Resnick did something to somebody. So FBI got wind of it somehow, and they caught the guy trying to put the bomb in the car. And so they made a deal. They got rid of the guy, and they got another guy, and to go through the action, and then they arrested the guy that was behind it all. This guy was a guy by the name of Chucky Burns. Chucky Burns was from St. Louis, involved with all the criminals in St. Louis, and he was arrested and put under house arrest, and he he skipped town and never came back to Las Vegas. Eventually died in St. Louis. But he was like, I used to see him every single day.
Wow.
One of my immediate bosses was Dave Goldberg, another good friend of Savella, and Johnny Vitale, all bookmakers from St. Louis. That's it. They were all at the Dunes, and that was his cousin. So every day I'd see Chuck come by and say hello to Dave. In fact, I helped Chucky with a bunch of things, and he was the one that was going to put a bomb in Ash Resnick's car. Unbelievable story. So.
The state of Las Vegas today, I don't really hear much in terms of mob influence on Las Vegas today. It seems like it's, for the most part, very corporate. Is that your that your understanding as well?
Yeah, it is, and it's really simple. When they made the Corporate Gaming Act, I think Governor Richard Bryan, was a great governor, by the way, and he was a guy you could walk up and talk to. I even helped him meet everybody at the Dunes when he ran for assembly. They passed a law that said, corporations can own casinos. And so the mob had it all figured out. You can own up to 4.99% of corporate stock and not have to get a gaming license. So if a bunch of guys got together and bought 4.99%, and then a couple of other guys bought that, the mob could run the casino, really, run it in the background because they owned the stock, and they'd have enough power to appoint the board of directors and appoint the positions in the casino. So that's what basically happened. And then, of course, Howard Hughes, of course, bought a lot of places to get rid of some of the mob. And so, there's relatives of the mob that are still around. And they have kids that have gone into legitimate businesses. Good for them. And I'm sure there's a couple of big names. I don't want to mention the names of the companies, but I would be very suspicious. At one time, I was very suspicious of Bally's. And I think that was an example of a lot of hidden ownership. So,
if someone is visiting Las Vegas today and they're looking for a great old school restaurant, right? A restaurant that you might find in the Vegas of yesteryear, where would you send them?
There's a couple of places, really. The Golden Steer, still there. It's right off of Sahara and the Strip.
Love the Caesar salad there. Love that Caesar salad.
Yeah, you know the place. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
This old steakhouse out of the old ranch house. Bob Anderson's old ranch house. It's way out in North Las Vegas area. You've got the Pepper Mill still open. They have a good restaurant, good general restaurant. There's a few other little ones. There's a couple of Oscar Goodman is operating in his front. Basically, is under his name. Oscar's at the downtown Union Plaza Hotel.
Right. Oscar's Beef, Booze, and Broads, I think, is the full name.
And
Oscar's a friend of mine. I love Oscar.
Oh yeah, he was my lawyer a couple of times. Yeah, he was a good guy. And so top of the Horseshoe, there used to be the Mint. Then the Horseshoe bought the Mint. They punched a hole through the thing. They didn't have to get another license because they wouldn't have got one. And they have the beautiful steakhouse overlooking the city. That's a great place. There's a lot of little local places that are just wonderful. It's wonderful.
Speaking of Oscar, by the way, he takes a lot of pride in being the father of the Mob Museum. I'm sure you visited it, and if you have, what's your review of the Mob Museum?
I think it's excellent. Everybody should go and take a look at that. And they don't even have all the stories there. There's still stories that nobody even knows about. There's some casinos, for instance. Now, I'm gonna spill the beans here a little bit. But the Sahara Hotel, where my cousin was, okay, when they owned it, him and Milton Prell and a bunch of partners, they eventually sold to Del Webb. Well, they never got in trouble for skimming because they did so much social, local charity. They never even questioned. And I know for a fact that they skimmed. There's no question about it. But the Flamingo got all the heat. Lansky was involved in it. A few other guys were involved in it. But it's still, if it happens today, it's done by single operators, like a little team of inside people, not for the mob, but just for stealing. And it does happen. And they've got tremendous security to watch it.
you've got to fill me in on this new betting system that you seem to have developed for football.
Oh.
I got hammered in my football pool recently. What can you give us the Reader's Digest version to what the Munari method is?
Well, it's called I Beat the Bookie. And ever since I worked at the Dunes Hotel, I would run across the street to the Churchill Downs sports book to get the scores. God forbid if I made a mistake. At those times, they had guys that were touts that were selling information, $50, $100, $200 a game. So I got to thinking about it. You know what? I want to make a machine that'll sell you a pick based on artificial intelligence and a neural brain network. And we built a couple machines, but now we built an application that anyone is going to be released soon. Not quite ready, almost ready. We've got the desktop version, but we don't have the iPad and the iPhone version quite done. It's almost done. It's almost there. And you basically you buy a subscription for one day for $10, for a month, $49, for a year, $499. You have unlimited searches and ideas. You can look at the line, you can look at the favorites, you can look at every sport. And then we give you our picks, and they're based on probability to win. Okay, all the numbers are put in, and the higher the probability, the more chances you are to win. You can bet the money line. That means just the highest score, where you lay or take odds, lay or take money, or you get the points, you lay points or take points, or you can bet the over and under. We've done this for every sport there is.
So if people want to check it out, how do they check it out?
Well, very soon, I'm going to have an announcement. We're going to give everyone no credit card, no hassle, 14-day free trial, period. 14 days.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that one out.
You'll get one. You'll get one for sure.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you letting me talk about that. I didn't want to do that.
No,
if you want to see, the website is ibeatthebookie.com. This talks about it and shows you what it is.
ibeatthebookie.com. People should check it out. They should also check out genomunari.com. And if you're interested in Old Vegas, we are just scratching the surface of the stories that Geno covers in. It's available on Amazon. You could check it out. And there are stories that are incredible, and they are all documented and absolutely true. Geno Munari, thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank, for having me on. Appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. If someone sent you this podcast, do us a favor and please subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Search The Racket Report, hit the subscribe button. You could also give us a nice review. That'll help other people discover the podcast. Feel free to share it with someone else. Until the next time we meet in cyberspace, I'll see you on the radio.